You're listening to the _Transformation podcast, your practical guide to business transformation.
Welcome to the _Transformation podcast. This is episode 3. My name's Jason West.
My name's Joe Ailes.
And together we're the founders of _. This week we consider the problem that your transformation program is seeking to address. Transformation initiatives often start due to external events, whether that's a change in CEO or some other senior exec, perhaps there's a merger and acquisition or changes in regulation, or perhaps the financial performance of the organisation either isn't quite where it should be or in fact it's overperforming. Now, senior execs often have a pretty clear idea on why we need to change, but it's not always clear at the top of the organisation exactly what needs to change. So the mandate comes down from on high that we must transform, and people often jump straight into designing solutions. So it's really important that you resist this temptation, because if you don't really define the problem you're trying to solve, you often end up fixing the wrong problem. And the business case that you put forward for investment is fundamentally flawed. So where you get this pressure to transform that's coming from the top, and people are really clear about why we need to transform, what are the things that people should stop and do instead of rushing straight to solution design?
Take time. Absolutely. You need to take time. You need to this is a really, really interesting point, because you do talk about people jumping into solutions, and naturally, when a mandate comes from the top to say, right, we must do something different, there is that tendency to go, okay, well, the exec wants something to happen, let's make it happen quick.
Yeah.
Without taking perspectives from other parts of the organization, without really understanding what are the key drivers across the business. Organizations know that they need to transform, they need to become something different. What they don't know is what needs to change.
Yes.
So, I want to become a more digitally savvy organization. Okay, but what does that mean?
Yes. Yeah.
You have to get into sort of some level of detail about, okay, what are the key things we need to change to allow us to become a digitally more savvy organization or more profitable business? Oh, we need to become more profitable.
Yes.
We need to reduce cost. Okay, yeah. But taking just sledgehammering cost out of an organization without taking due care about what processes are going to get, how are things going to be done in the future with fewer people and less capability.
Yes.
So you've got to not just jump into, let's solve the problem that the exec have told us we need to solve. Take time. I know it's hard for sponsors to sort of hear this probably, but actually take a little step back and just go, okay, what are the key things we need to do?
Yeah. I think at a macro level, there's this really important point where you've got to understand where are we today first, and then define where do we need to be tomorrow, and then work out how you bridge the gap between those two things. It's often easier to jump straight into where we need to be tomorrow. And you can end up in a very odd place. Either you define something based on your view as a single function or a leadership team or even an individual that's divorced from what the business actually thinks and needs and wants. So it's much better at the very beginning to really start off, well, where are we today? And what problems do we have today? What is it that we need to solve that's going to have a meaningful impact on the business?
Absolutely. Organizations or functions they're trying to transform become a little bit insular and start sort of trying to do things in dark space about, right, okay, we've been given a task to do X. Let me go and do X without really engaging the organization sort of broadly about, well, okay, if I change X, what's the impact on you guys?
Yeah.
So one of the things we absolutely, in _, we truly believe is that in this phase of a program, you've got to engage the executives of an organization. You've got to make sure that you're taking their perspective into account. So if you're transforming a finance function, a procurement function, or an HR function, or an IT function for that matter, engage other parts of the organization that are potentially the customers of your function to make sure that you understand their pain points, their drivers, their key objectives. What are they trying to achieve? What are their goals? And somehow try to fit your transformation agenda to help those functions deliver what they need to deliver.
Yes, yeah, because the transformation in a single function rarely exists in isolation.
Yes, and it's rarely successful.
Yes, absolutely. So I think when you're speaking to those execs, actually, having a formal sit down, at least an hour with each of the key exec, really go through a structured process of interviewing them, document what they've got to say, play that back to them, send them the document. It's essential to understanding the why. That starts to do some of the what, because they'll have a view as to what needs to change, and it will be an exec level view. If they're really well connected to their organization, it's probably going to be a good way there. They're not going to understand the nuance of every detail, but they should have a pretty clear view. But the other thing that spending time with the exec does as a program leader is it gives you a real insight into the politics. Who's in, who's out, who's going to be a potential ally, who's going to be a potential blocker. Like you said, what are they trying to achieve? And how you can align what you're trying to do as part of your transformation with their agenda, their objectives. And that's something that the sponsor has to be absolutely all over. But as a program lead, you need to be working those angles as well.
And ultimately, this is where you're going to find some points of resistance as well. So some of the transformation, some of your transformation objectives or some of the things you're trying to achieve might play against some of other members of the executive's view.
Yes.
So this is a good opportunity, to your point, to sort of start looking, okay, where are going to be my challenges at an exec level when I'm starting to drive this program through later on?
Yeah.
And just start building a bit of a coalition among the exec. That actually, is this the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Do the exec pay as much importance to this activity, this program, as you do?
Yeah.
And if frankly it's not important to anybody else other than you, really question why you're doing it.
Yeah.
So it's a good way of validating that, actually that we've got enough support from the exec to make this successful, because ultimately when you're going through the change and when you're implementing the change, they're the people that you want to be behind what you're trying to do, because any transformation program is painful.
Yeah.
Right. So the business is going to encounter pain way down the organization. It's felt all the way through the business. So having the execs absolutely supporting it and standing behind what you're trying to achieve is really, really important.
And on that topic of engaging down throughout the organization, it is important to get input from not just the exec. You need input from other people.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Again, the exec's view, and I think we'll pick up this probably in a lot more detail in some of our future podcasts around requirements gathering and so on. But one of the execs have got a view of the world that is different from the operational view of the world, and some of the inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of processes, being finance processes, people processes, HR processes, etc., are not felt at the very top. Are felt throughout the organization, and we've got an awful lot of people out in the business that sometimes have to live with this pain and just think, actually, we're living with the pain because it's the way it is. Yeah. And don't often voice their discontent to the exec about how things take so, why are things so broken.
So I think one of the things that works well is where you use anonymous surveys to go out to a broad group of people and you ask for their input and their opinion on what's working well, what's not working so well, but gathering it in a really structured way. Yeah. So as you're looking at an HR function, a finance function, whatever, you have a very clear set of processes, and you want that structured feedback that says, okay, how important are these processes? How effective are we at delivering them today? And kind of what are your key priorities for if we were going to change something, what should we change? And then really analyzing that data. And what you can then do is compare that against, well, how are we deploying our resources today? So using that same set of structured processes, we understand from the business, okay, these things are important. These things, were perhaps really effective or not so effective. Well, getting that structured view from people within the organization. Well, these are the processes we spend our time on. How does that marry up to what the customer says is important? And when you're looking at that, how do we spend our time? You can then start working out from that, well, what's the cost of delivering these processes?
Yeah, absolutely.
And those are things that you can compare against other organizations, and that starts building up your business case. But there's some real notes of caution around kind of these activity analysis
and voice of the survey, voice of the customer as well.
Yes,
these surveys, if they're not positioned well, actually a lot of organizations, a lot of sponsors are always nervous about going out to the broader business. That's one of the challenges, one of the barriers we come across.
Yes,
when we're talking to a sponsor about, okay, the way we should approach our problem definition, dear sponsor, is we need to engage exec. That's often
that's generally okay.
That's not generally okay, not often an issue. When we then start to propose the fact that we actually need to engage the broader business.
We need to survey 300 managers per country. At that point,
it becomes a little bit tricky. And more importantly, the tricky part is us receiving feedback on the effectiveness of process delivery in their function. So that as a sponsor, you need to sort of be comfortable that you're going out and getting views from people that may not necessarily be positive, right? So but that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Be comfortable that the people across the organization are going to give you some feedback that, you may concur or not with. But take it on board. Take it on board.
It gives you that permission.
Faith. Absolutely.
To do what you probably wanted to do anyway.
And frankly, if you then ultimately change something, and if your transformation is successful and you change that person's point of view from actually this process, the way you deliver this particular business process. And when we talk about business process, we're not talking about a transactional process. We're talking about business strategy. We're talking about a whole bunch of different things, right? Process in its broadest sense. And actually, if you execute your transformation 3 years later, you rock up to the same individual, and the individual then turns around and says, actually, do you know what? Last time I said that process was totally ineffective, but now it's actually, partially effective or actually highly effective. It's a good thing.
You're listening to the Transformation podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit _group.com.
I think the other thing it does is it gives you insight into the so what. So this isn't effective. It takes too long to hire people. Well, so what? And the business will tell you so what. It means we're not hitting our sales numbers. It means that these programs are failing. It means our customers aren't being served correctly. So you get that real kind of granular detail that you can put into a case for change that says that if we address these things, then X, Y, and Z will get better. And it will be reflected in the language of the business, because they will be the ones telling you what needs to change.
Absolutely. And when you get that feedback, I mean, it's rich information. Don't be afraid to tell the world. Tell them.
Yes.
Give the feedback back to the individuals that were involved in the survey. These were the results, and be comfortable with. You told us that we are effective in. We're good in these things, and we're not so good in these things. And okay, we've now got a program that will shift the dial on the things we're not very good at. It's not going to shift the dial probably to the absolute best performance in the world, unless that business process is so critical to the success of the business. Actually, it needs to shift.
Absolutely.
But it allows you to then sort of look at those areas of your function that you're not, in the eyes of the customer. And when I'm talking about the customer, I'm talking about the internal customer. In the eyes of the customer, you're not effective at. And then it sort of allows you the opportunity to say, okay, as part of our transformation program, we're going to shift the dial on these ones.
Yeah.
And tell them that as part of your objectives is to shift the dial on these ones because that's what you told us we needed to change.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful. It's so powerful. It just puts so much meaning and purpose behind your program.
So the other thing that once you've understood what the customer really wants and needs and their views on what's effective and what's not effective is to get this external view. So using those same processes that you looked at how your people were spending their time, you looked at what was important and effective from the customer's perspective, you then benchmark how efficient, how effective are we, how quick are we to deliver these processes? How many people do we deploy to them? What's the cost? And then how does that compare to the external market? So actually benchmarking and providing hard evidence to back up either you've got a business that's saying this really isn't working, it's taking too long, it's too expensive, and it's causing me this pain. You can then look at the external market and say, you know what, you're right. Yeah. If we're at the 25th percentile, it's costing us 75% more to deliver this process than other organizations. But you know what, if we got to average, then we could save X million or X 100,000. Yeah. And it's often hundreds of thousands and millions in any organization of any size. So actually spending time gathering data, using an external benchmark provider, structuring your data so you're comparing apples with apples, and then making a set of decisions about what are we going to dial up, what are we going to dial down, what are we absolutely going to address because the customer says it's important. And there might be some things that perhaps we're gold plating.
Yeah.
We're gold plating our P2P process, and do we really need to? Yeah. Could we perhaps reinvest some of that resource we're deploying to it into another area that's more important, maybe our order to cash? So actually understanding how you compare to the external market is really key. And that's something that, again, people can be a little bit uncomfortable with, but it forms the basis of your first business case.
You're absolutely right. Individuals are cautious about and reluctant to sometimes compare. How do we stack up against the external market? And people sometimes can sort of get a little bit emotional about who am I comparing myself against, right? My organization is fundamentally different to other organizations, but actually in its broadest sense, and a people process, a finance process, or an IT process, a procurement process are largely the same. There'll be some nuances, absolutely, from industry sector to industry sector, from country to country. There'll be absolute nuances, but actually comparing how your hire to retire process, it takes you 50 days to bring somebody into the organization. And actually the benchmark is telling you that externally there are organizations out there, they're bringing individuals into their organization in 35 days and 40 days. Forget the fact that they're a different sector. The reality is that they will have different set of processes, different technology and different capability behind the resourcing, the hire process that allows them to bring those people in quicker. So don't be fooled by the fact that this is they're in a different sector, because actually a lot of that is largely irrelevant.
Yes. And then what's the lost profit on not having that person in the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So benchmark when we're engaging with our organizations we work with, we also want them to open your horizon, just benchmarking, got the capability of benchmarking within your industry, but actually think broader, think across all business. How do we stack up against all businesses? And then, of course, you've got the means of cutting data into different regions, different sectors, and different how do we compare ourselves against organizations of similar size and shape and so on? So you can sometimes get sort of paralyzed by lots and lots of data. If organizations out there are engaging in any benchmarking activity, be careful. Not absolutely embrace it, but be absolutely objective about what you're trying to achieve and what you're comparing yourself with, because that's really, really important.
I think the final thing on benchmarking, because again, it's a massive topic. We could bore all day on this, really. But the important thing to remember if you do go out and do some benchmarking, it's not possible to be world class in everything.
No,
you're not going to be in the upper quartile of every single measure, and that's fine.
Yes,
that's your strategy. Hopefully, that's your strategy. It should be. Strategically, we're going to be this sort of organization. We're going to focus on these things because we understand that's important to our customers.
Like we said earlier, don't gold plate absolutely every single process in your in your organization. One other point, actually, when we're talking a little bit earlier about activity analysis, that's another area that we've come across where there's
some resistance,
absolutely. And actually, if it's not done correctly, it can really cause a downstream impact across in the function in which you're doing the exercise on. We talked in previous episode about sponsorship and the whole authenticity of a sponsor. And this becomes really, really important in this space, because this is not an activity that's going to. This is really purely to understand where are our teams spending their time on, and how does that align to the business product, to what the customer would want us to do. And it allows us to do the benchmarking and so on. But actually, what's really interesting is when you start looking at what does the business see as important in the world of HR, for instance. They see actually talent management and succession planning is really, really, really important. And when you then overlay that with how much effort is my organization spending across those two areas, and you actually see that actually very, very little is being spent in those two areas.
Yeah, we're spending all our time managing absence and paying people.
Or doing transactional activity.
Or employee relations or whatever.
Which some businesses are absolutely important. But actually it allows it gives the sponsors a story to tell, doesn't it? It says, well, actually, do you know what? You pay importance to these topics, but actually my team are spending time doing not that activity. So then it allows the program team to sort of delve deeply into, okay, why is that? Do we have issue around policy? Do we have issue around people capability? Do we have issue around systems, technology? Could we automate? Could we digitalize more? And it's at that point that actually technology becomes an enabler. You don't start with a technology transformation. You then you work out that actually technology is going to enable me to transform based on this set of data that I've now gathered.
So hopefully we've given our listeners some view of how important we think this area is to the success of your transformation. So actually defining the problem that you're going to solve up front is really key. Also given some thoughts and ideas on the sorts of activities that are useful to carry out during this phase, and the fact that you're going to have to put time and resource into it before you start rushing off and designing solutions. Hopefully we've made that case. I think some of the key outputs from here are obviously it's your high level business case. Here's where we are today versus the market. We want to be over there in the future. And we want to do that because you, the business, have told us that's what's important. So we're realigning to what's important to the business. So really being conspicuously customer driven and customer centric, and using that as the basis for your case for change. So next week, we're going to look at problem definition through a slightly different lens. It's actually a separate episode that we're looking at requirements gathering. It's absolutely essential to defining the problem, but it's such a big area, we actually pulled that out as a separate episode. So please tune in for that.
So we hope you found this episode useful, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So, whether you're a program sponsor, a transformation professional, or actually an individual that's being impacted by transformation, please get in touch with our show via our WhatsApp group or via our website _group.com. So if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like and subscribe via your favorite podcast directory.